Okay guys, I am so excited to talk about all of the books that I read in June and July. Some of these books I have been waiting for ages to talk about. Some I really loved, some I didn't DNF and wished that I had. So we were all over the map. And we have a lot to talk about because I did not do a wrap up for June because life was just lifing, okay? So I was not in a good headspace. Things were going on. That's why I didn't post a lot the last 2 months, but we're back on it. Things are looking up. That's all we can do is move forward, okay? So I read 16 books over the course of June and July. 9 of those were in June, only 7 of those were in July. I know that that is still good. That's just not normally how much I read, I feel. 4 of those books were romance, 6 were literary fiction, 2 were like a sci-fi fantasy situation, 1 was a true fantasy, and 3 were actually YA fantasy books. So all over the board these last 2 months. So let's go ahead and start talking about these books because there's a lot to talk about. First one that I read in June was The Fellowship of the Ring. I had never read The Lord of the Rings before. Now, before you come for me, okay, I had seen the movies growing up, and so I was like already really well acquainted with the story. So not that I never really felt the need to read the book, but it just was never on my radar of things I really had to do because I felt so familiar with the story, if that makes any sense. But I really loved this book. When I wrote this on Goodreads, a few of my friends like commented on it and was like, "You pity rounded up The Lord of the Rings, like, are you joking?" Because I rated it in my review, I like rated it a 5-star, but I like wrote in it that it was like a 4, but I rounded it up because I love it, like the nature of it as a whole. But here's my reason why, okay? I had this same problem when I read the first Game of Thrones book, that everything is followed so closely. Essentially, I already know the story so well. Like, especially with this one, I had seen this movie so many times, where when I'm reading it, I don't really feel the push to be like, oh my gosh, this is so good, what's gonna happen next, blah, blah, because I already know everything that's already gonna happen. So my reading experience was not a 5-star reading experience, but for like world building and character development and dialogue and all of the amazing things in the story as a whole, this was a 5-star. It just wasn't a 5-star reading experience for me, if that makes any sense. So next we read Throttled by Lauren Asher. I read this on my Kindle. It was on Kindle Unlimited. And I'm glad that I read it on there because if I would have paid money for this book, I would have been highly irritated. I wanted to read this series because I really liked the Love Redesigned, I think is the first one in the Lakefront Billionaires. I really liked that. And, you know, F1 was kind of, you know, sweeping the nation. Like, I don't know. I just like was hearing a lot about F1. And so I was like, oh yeah, sure, let me try this out. It was one of those things where it was so bad that it was good almost, or it was so bad that it was like entertaining, essentially. Like, I don't really have a lot to say for this except for I didn't care for it, but I have heard that this is everyone's least favorite in this series. So, and the other ones are on Kindle Unlimited, so if I'm in need of a palate cleanser, will I go to it? Maybe, but I think you can skip it. I don't think it's necessary. I think that there's a lot of other really good romance books on Kindle Unlimited that you can go for and spend your time with. But this one is essentially, it's an F1 romance where the main girl, her brother is like an F1 like racer, and she falls in love with his rival, essentially. That's really all I have to say about it. I don't remember a whole lot except I was kind of unenthused. I was kind of just like, oh, okay. Next, one of my favorite books from these last 2 months was This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune. 5-star, loved this book, no notes. I I love Felix so much. I love the setting of this book. It's so good. Essentially, we have Lucy. Lucy and her best friend live in Toronto, and her best friend is from Prince Edward Island. She grew up there. And so she is being taken home with her best friend for the first time, and her friend's plane got delayed. And so she's just kind of killing time, kind of just trying to see the vibes and all that stuff. And she meets Felix. They have like an instant connection, and it's not like insta love, it's just like instant connection, if that makes any sense. Like they're not automatically like, I would die for you or anything crazy like that. They're just like really into each other. And so they have a really great night, and then they wake up and they realize that Felix is her best friend's older brother. And her best friend, for their friendship, had one rule that she could not fall in love with her brother. So it's great, and it's kind of told over like 5 summers, I believe, mixed with the present. It's great, it's phenomenal, it's awesome. Setting is amazing, characters are great, character development is awesome. Felix is so hot. I am so in love with him. It's just a great situation. Would highly recommend. Next, we were kind of on a romance kick. I was filming a vlog for it, so just kind of went for it. This is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I believe I also gave this a 5-star. Or maybe like a 4, I don't know. But this is about 2 people, and they essentially have a curse, they call it, where every single time one of their exes breaks up with them, they instantly go on to find the love of their life. Instantly move on to find these people, and so they start to date to see if their curses can cancel out each other. And so when they break up, they will then find the love of their life. This book as a concept was really cool to me. I feel like a lot of romance books are very repetitive. I feel like the tropes are very common. So I was very excited when I heard the premise of this, because it just did not sound like anything that I had read before, and it wasn't. It was great. This was my first Abby Jimenez. I did read these out of order. Abby Jimenez enthusiasts, please don't come for me. Please don't come for me. I still had a really great time. And I think that there are really good subplots of like family drama things that the characters have to work through that I don't want to say, because I didn't know that they were happening, and I really liked that surprise. So I'm not going to say anything about that, but loved the main guy. I really did like the main girl. A lot of the things that I'm seeing about this is a lot of people were saying that neither of them had any business being in relationships at this point. And I do have to agree with that. They both have a lot of stuff going on and they're not really available, but in their defense, in defense of these fictional characters, they did not know that they were getting into something that was going to mean more to them. Like, they really did think it was going to be like she's a travel nurse, so she wasn't even going to like stay there. It was supposed to be a very like get your dates in, break up, get out, cancel out the curse situation. And you can't help falling in love, people. You can't help it. All that to say, that wasn't really an issue for me. Yeah, I had a great time. It took my mind off of life. It was a great time. So next we had another dud. I wish I had DNF'd this book, and I honestly, for the life of me, cannot explain why I didn't. And I was disappointed in this book because I was very excited to read it. This is The Extinction of Irena. This takes place in a Polish forest where there is an author, and they have a group of translators. Every single time she comes out with a book, she has a group of translators come, and she basically explains to them what the book is about, how she wants it to be portrayed, etc., all of this stuff. And they live at her house with her and translate this book, and then they go on into the world, and the book is a success, all of that stuff. And these translators love their authors so much. They like worship the ground that she walks on, basically. And during this trip to translate her next book, which is rumored to be her best one yet, the author, Irena, kind of She's acting very different. She is not really the same. She's just being so cryptic and weird and like just so different. And so these authors are realizing, these translators are realizing like, oh, maybe she's not the person that we thought she was, like what's she hiding, blah, 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 which seems like an extremely fascinating, like that just sounded so cool to me, the prospect of reading this book and what it was about. And it just fell so flat for me. Like, I was even more disappointed because the first like 5 pages, like the introduction, I was like, oh, this is gonna be so good. This is gonna be great. And it just fell so flat for me. The dialogue felt flat, the characters felt flat, the premise felt flat, the plot was just not what it was promised to be. And I was highly irritated about it. I didn't like it. I don't know why I finished it. 1 star. Next, I read Heartless Hunter on my Kindle again, and this was actually for a book club with a few of my friends, and I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed it a lot. Not a lot more than I anticipated to, but it definitely, like, it captured my attention quite a bit. Essentially, the premise of this book is that we have a girl, Rune, who is a witch, and she, being a witch, is like illegal, like you can't be a witch. And she is posing as kind of like a aristocrat, socialite, Paris Hilton like type of, you know, mask, to ward people off from thinking that she is this witch who is actually secretly the Crimson Moth. She is saving witches who are being like taken to be murdered, essentially. And so she is trying to throw everyone off her scent by being this like dumb London Tipton-esque girl. She needs to marry someone who is like involved with the witches, so that she can get information out of them and be able to save people better. And so she falls in love, I think, why do I want to call him Gideon? Is that his name? I don't know. She basically wants to like persuade him to marry her because he is like the head witch hunter guy. And unbeknownst to her, Gideon is also, I really hope that's his name, Gideon is also trying to marry her because he thinks that she's the Crimson Moth. And so he is trying to find out if she's a witch or not. And so they're both doing this like cat and mouse thing where they're saying like, I can't really be in love with you, but I need to convince you that I'm in love with you. So if I really were to be honest, what would I say right now? And what would I do right now? And then they are, and they're actually showing their true feelings masked as that they're faking it, essentially. So I loved that. I thought that was really cool. I do have a few questions about the ending. 1 or 2 things aren't adding up for me, but I am excited to read the next one. I definitely will continue the series. I believe I gave this one a 4 star. Then I read another YA fantasy situation that is Powerful by Lauren Roberts. I don't really have a lot to say about this. I want to give it like a 3. I don't have a lot to say about it in the sense that the main character of the story, like you already know what's going to happen. You already know how her story ends. It's just kind of like a how did we get there situation. And I just don't have a lot to say about it. It was an interesting time. I did tear up a little bit at the end. But, you know, it is what it is. It did what it needed to do, I guess. I don't really know. You can kind of skip it, honestly. we're going to talk about Reckless later. I don't really understand why this was necessary, to be completely honest. I don't. Not yet. Okay, so I just spilled my matcha everywhere and broke the glass. Okay, good grief. Now that that's cleaned up. So, next book we have is The Ministry of Time. This is by Kaliane Bradley. I don't know exactly how to pronounce her first name. This was the book that we read for the book club that I lead, and hearing everyone's thoughts on this was so interesting. I really liked this. I gave this like a 4.25. I really liked it, and hearing everyone's opinions on it was just so interesting. It was such a good conversation. But this is basically set in the future. This is like a sci-fi fantasy, not even romance situation. This is set in the future where the European government has essentially, the British government to be specific, has actually uncovered how to time travel. And so to test the time travel, they are having people who have passed away in the past, they are time traveling to bring them to the future to see if they'll survive, to see how they acclimate, to basically use them as guinea pigs, essentially. This book has so many layers to it. Our main character is so interesting, and our man that she is in charge of, because she works for this organization, so she essentially is supposed to be a handler for this time traveler. And he is like an Arctic explorer from like the 1700s who's like never seen a woman with her ankles showing, and it is so funny. It's so good. It's such a big conversation on bodily autonomy and individualism and politics and belonging, and all of these really amazing themes were in this book. It was so interesting. I would highly recommend buddying reading it with someone, have someone to talk to about it. And the ending was just so interesting. I just had such a good time reading this, and it was a ball. It was great. It was interesting. It really made you think. It is such a good mashup of a ton of different genres, and I think she did a very, very good job, and I'm very interested to see what she writes in the future. Last book in June was Matrix by Lauren Groff. I read The Vaster Wilds earlier this year and fell in love with it. I fell in love with her writing. I fell in love with her as an author. Like, the way her brain works and what she chooses to write stories about is just so interesting to me, and I'm just so fascinated with her as an author. And so this one is actually set, I want to say it's like the 1100s. Yes, so our book starts in 1158 in France. Our main character, Marie, is actually somehow related to French royalty, essentially, but they don't know what to do with her. They tell her all the time that she is ugly and huge, like she's tall and she's manly, and no one knows what to do with her at court because she doesn't really fit in at court. She's not this like beautiful, dainty little girl who can kind of be pushed and bossed around. She is told essentially that because they don't really know what to do with her, she is going to be given to the nuns. So she essentially she doesn't really have like choices over herself. She kind of has to go where they tell her to because she doesn't really have any, she's like the sole surviving member of her family. So it's kind of like wherever's gonna put a roof over my head, essentially. And so she is so pissed that she has to go to this nunnery, but because of her position, she is eventually going to be prioress. So she is eventually, as she gets older and learns how to live in the priory and live with these nuns and take charge, she is going to eventually, because of her bloodline and her birthright, she kind of like a consolation prize that she'll be able to be in charge one day. And so she is so pissed. There is also an element of this that I think should remain a surprise between who it is between, but it is also sapphic, which was really great. She starts out, she goes to this nunnery, she is so angry, and she has kind of resolved to die essentially, and something happens that makes her realize she is going to crush this position. Like, she is like, if I'm gonna live and if I'm gonna have to be here, I'm gonna do a freaking badass job. And she just creates essentially an army of nuns. Like, she like turns this priory around. Like, when she goes in there, they are all starving and there's no food and all of the nuns hate their lives, and she is just like, this is miserable, this is miserable. And she essentially turns that shit around, just is so self-righteous and so important to herself. And she really puts herself on this pedestal, and it is all about legacy and what it means to leave a legacy and what gets you remembered. And is it good that you're remembered that way, or is it bad? It's just so fascinating, and I really liked it. I do think that my reading experience was hindered by what was going on in my life. I do think that if I had read this during a different headspace, I would have given it a different rating, but I gave it maybe a 3.75. But the conversation surrounding this book, the lessons learned from it were really great. There were elements where I was kind of like, why is this necessary? What are we doing here? You know what I mean? But that happens sometimes. Okay, so now we're on to July, and our first book I really, really loved, and it also was just longlisted for the Booker Prize. That is Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. I loved this book. This author, to me, is so fascinating how she was able to do so much in such a short period of time. It's actually astounding to me. This essentially is all about a girls, because they're like high schoolers, a girls boxing competition. And so you go through, each chapter is a match between two of the characters. And they're not long chapters, but within this short period of time, you get to learn so much about the character and why they want to win so bad, and what their home life is like, and like what could do for them in their future. And then it goes kind of into their future and all of that stuff. And this is also kind of about legacy and winning, and is winning important? There was this really good scene where the author talked about how in this gymnasium, in this boxing ring where they are hosting this competition, they are like in the dark essentially, with all of these like artificial lights shining down on them, and there are trophies in cases that everyone just walks past, and belts, like championship belts that are fake gold that are falling apart in the case, and like basically alluding to like, does any of this actually matter? And these girls, like every single one of them, did everything in their power to get to this competition, and it's just so important to them in the moment. And then you kind of see their future a little bit and see that so much life was ahead of them, and nothing, like there's this huge important moment that they think is going to change the rest of their life. And it's just it was just so great, the way, like the amount of emotion that this author was able to make me feel. Some of these characters you really only see for one chapter, because they don't win, so they don't advance, so you don't see them again. And it's just so, it's just so impressive. It's so impressive. 5-star. I think this is going to be shortlisted. I hope that it's shortlisted. I'm very excited. Okay, so then we have another mild disappointment, and that would be A Novel Love Story by Ashley Posten. When this book first came out, and I read it pretty quickly after it came out, and I was so interested to see what other people like on YouTube were going to think about it, and so many people loved this book, and I was just kind of like, what am I missing? Like, no, like I gave this a 3-star. I'm glad I finished it. I didn't ever think about DNFing it. I just realized that I didn't really care. I don't know. And the thing that I think was the most disappointing about it is that I loved The 7-Year Slip. I loved that book. And the premise of this sounds really fantastic to me, at least. It is basically a girl, and she's a part of this book club, and she has a bunch of different life circumstance things that are stressing her out, and she is going on this road trip, and she gets lost, and she ends up in the fictional town of her favorite book series. And so she ends up there, and she stays there for a little bit, and she meets someone who does not fit the story. Like, she's meeting these characters, and she can tell exactly who they are, and she's becoming friends with them, and this random guy in the middle just isn't a character in the story. So she's like, are you real? Are you also like a new book that the author was writing? Like all that weird stuff. This book fell so flat for me. I was not impressed at all. I feel like the side characters for this book did not feel like side characters in a romance book that I normally read. They all were just so one-dimensional. I also kind of feel like the love interest was one-dimensional, and he's going through his own stuff. Him going through his own stuff translates in the way where he is like giving nothing. I mean, he is like barely even speaking to this girl, like giving absolutely zero. And then all of a sudden, next chapter, he's like so in love with her and is like doing all of these really nice things and like trying to get to know her. And then he'll like cut it off again, and then he'll switch back, and it's just so weird. I don't know. I don't really have a lot to say, but it's the truth. That's how I feel about it. I don't know. So next I read Reckless by Lauren Roberts, the highly anticipated sequel to Powerless. I liked it. I think I gave this a 4. It was entertaining. I was very excited that the setting for this book was very different. I liked that they were kind of, and I don't want to actually say nearly anything about this book actually. I think that there's a lot that is kind of unknown going into this book unless things have been spoiled for you. There's a lot going into this book, like you don't really know what the setting's going to be, where the characters are going to be, if they're going to interact, how they're going to interact. Like you don't really know anything going into it. And so I want to protect that for people. But I will say I liked the setting. I liked how different it was than the first book, and not in a bad way. It's just a different story now. Like it's the same story, but it's different, if that makes any sense. But I still love Kai. Love him, still love him to death. And the whole ending, if you've seen anything online, the ending is highly surprising. I did not see it coming at all. I actually vlogged me reading this book. I did not see the ending coming at all. I felt so stupid. Or I watched Sarah Caroli's YouTube video where she was talking about it, and she goes, "Oh yeah, I knew it was in the box." And I was like, I was not picturing, like they're talking about, like there's something in this box that happens at the end. I was picturing like a box like this big. Like I was picturing like a huge box with like a gun in it or something. Like I was picturing like a big box. I'm talking too much. Anyway, I liked it. 4 stars, entertaining. We'll see what happens in the last one. Is it the best thing I've ever read? No. Next I read Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I loved this book. This book was so eerie and weird and great. Okay, so this premise is also so fascinating to me. So we essentially have 2 women. They are Leah and Miri, and they are married. They've been together for quite a long time. Leah's job is she's a marine biologist, and she essentially goes on these submarine expeditions periodically. This is not the first time that she's been on one of these expeditions. And Miri is left at home. Obviously, she can't go with her. Leah never returns from her mission. It is supposed to be, I think, like 2 months max. That even seems too long to me. Maybe it was only supposed to be 1. Leah goes under with 3 other biologists to explore this area and gather research, and they don't come back. And the company that Leah works for is being very cryptic and is not giving Miri any information. They just keep on telling her it's been delayed. And Miri is kind of like, is she even alive? Like Miri is convinced by the time they found her that Leah is dead. Leah resurfaces. She comes back, but when she comes back, she is different. She is like weirdly laying in the bath all day. She like is not talking. She says weird stuff. Like even when she is talking, like she's saying odd shit, and she's just like a ghost walking through the house and like turning on water faucets and then walking away and like staring at the water and having these nightmares. And she's different. She's different, and she's odd, and she's acting weird, and Miri cannot figure out what is going on. And so throughout this book, you get flashbacks of their life together before Leah went missing and their relationship. And it was so impactful to do that and the way that the author wrote about it, because you can sense how lonely Mary is now, because Leah's there, but she's not there. Like, she's not acting the same. They might as well not, like, she might as well not be there, to be honest. And so Mary is comforted that Leah's there again, but she isn't, because it's a completely different relationship now. And you can sense with these flashbacks, with the use of these flashbacks, how lonely Mary is and how much she misses her wife. And she's missing her wife, but her wife is right there. But the person who came back is not the person who left. And you're also getting Leah's perspective from being in the submarine and what happened and why she is different. And it is so fascinating. It's creepy. It's eerie. It is great. And I loved it. I loved every second of it. I am so excited for her next book, Private Rights, to come out. I just pre-ordered it the other day. And I don't even know what that book is about. I'm just so excited. I love this author's writing. I think she has a fantastic career ahead of her, truthfully. Next, another disappointing book. Sadly. This is Moonbound by Robin Sloan. This was our book club book for July that I host. And let me tell you how, not hard, but how much of a different experience it is to lead a book club conversation when you like the book versus when you don't. It was so interesting to me, but I do have to say I am clearly in the minority for not liking this book. I was one of two people who didn't like it out of the entire book club, and the other person liked it more than I did, and I went on Goodreads. Honestly, I didn't see one bad review on Goodreads. Like, all of these reviews were like 5 stars. Like, this book was written for me. This is the best thing I've ever written. This is fantastic. I'm the problem. Like, I have to be the problem. My brain is the issue. The issue is not this book. It's me. So Robin Sloan, I commend you for your creativity. This book is so imaginative and creative. He basically pulled so many different types of stories and types of books and sci-fi and fantasy and mystery and all of these things and elements to create this book. And it's very creative. I definitely commend him for that. It just wasn't the book for me. I am not the target audience for this book, unfortunately. Essentially, we have our main character, Ariel, and he is a 12-year-old boy, and he lives in the city of Sauvage. And it's interesting because it's set in the future, but they are very much a little Renaissance time situation. And our narrator is actually an AI robot situation who is seeing everything from a third-party perspective. And I really liked that. I really did like that element of it. And that's all that I'll say, because the book turns into a completely different direction. And I think that kind of is where my disappointment stemmed from, because within the first few chapters, when the first plot twist happens, I really liked the direction that I thought he was going to go in, and then he went in a completely different direction that I wasn't anticipating, which isn't a bad thing. I just preferred where I thought it was going, if that makes any sense. But he zigs where you think he's gonna zag, and he transformed the novel and the story, and it, in that sense, it is very impressive. It just wasn't for me. Okay, second to last book that we need to talk about, that is Mayflies by Andrew O'Hagan. Loved this book. I loved this book. This is definitely a 5-star situation, as you can tell. So great, so good. This is about James and Tully. They're growing up in Glasgow, and they are in high school, and they have a dream to go to London with all of their friends. They go to London, they're having all these experiences, and they decide that they're going to live their life differently than everyone else does. And then you flash forward, I want to say about 20 years, 20, 30 years. Tully calls James, and he has news. and the book just takes off from there. So we're going back, in half of the book is in the past, them growing up, them being best friends, and then the last half of the book is the news that Tully had to share and the aftermath of that. And this is such a fantastic book about friendship, about like romance almost, but in a platonic way, just seeing life in a different way. The main character, James, he's saying these amazing, profound quotes. Like, he's just so profound. Like, this author was just so good. I was crying at the end, even though you know what's gonna happen. I was crying. The way that the author wrote these scenes and really put you in there. And I really knew that he was impressive as a writer because these boys love like music and movies and all of these things, and they're so passionate about those things. And the dialogue between these characters, there's quoting things at each other and just yapping back and forth and back and forth. And I never once felt lost or out of the picture, and I never was taken out of the story, even if I didn't really know the music they were referencing or knowing the movie that they were referencing. You can just feel how these characters feel about these things. Like, I think that's the best way to explain it. You really feel like you were in the story, and like you were just able to sense the emotions and where they're going with things so easily. It's so impressive. I would highly, highly recommend this book. Last one that we need to talk about was another favorite, and I wish I would have annotated this book. This is Seating Arrangements by Maggie Shipstead. I love this book. This was my third Maggie Shipstead, and it is so impressive to me. Like, she is so impressive to me as a writer because her other two books, all three of these books are so completely different. Such completely different tones and story and setting, and just everything is so unique about them, and I'm just so impressed. This is about a family called the Van Meters, and they have a house in Connecticut. It's their summer home. Their oldest daughter, Daphne, is getting married, and so they are hosting this wedding at their house. So it takes over the course of 3 days. You basically just get to follow all the members of this family through this journey, and it's a similar thing. Like, you get to know these characters so well in such a short period of time. Every single, even the side characters, her ability to just form a sentence and just put you right in the middle of their brain is just so impressive. So you're being taken through this weekend of this wedding, and we have the dad who has an inappropriate crush on one of the bridesmaids, who is a like nuisance right now, is that he is not being accepted into this golf club that is near them. You have an hilarious aunt who is like kind of like the black sheep situation. The two sisters have such different things going on in there. All of the bridesmaids, everything. It's such a good family story. It's very entertaining. It's funny. The writing is so good. There's runaway lobster and a beached whale, and it's a great time. It's a really great, entertaining time, and it's also deeply emotional and very affecting as well. So highly recommend that as well. So those are all of the 16 books that I needed to talk to you about today. I hope you maybe heard about a book that you were interested in reading, maybe one that you haven't heard of before. Yeah, let me know in the comments what your favorite book was from June or July, and I will check it out. I hope you guys have a great day.